Now, before we get started, we couldn't possibly put on the show without our sponsors. So, if you haven't yet heard of or tried Heights, then what are you waiting for? You might already have a daily hair care and skincare routine, so it's about time that you made brain care just as important. It's what most of our secret leaders now add to their daily lives, trusting Heights to look after their most important organ for long-term health and nearer-term mental performance, using a mix of plant-based omega-3s and key nutrients that science says our brains need to thrive, delivered through your letterbox every month. Listeners of this show can get £10 off a quarterly subscription with the code LEADERSHEIGHTS at yourheights.com. And I want to take a moment to let you know about the immense e-commerce marketing platform called Klaviyo. It's what I've been using at my own startup since we got going to get a full 360-degree view of my customer, and I've not looked back since. Plus the fact that 50,000 other e-commerce businesses use it to find out what their customers are doing so they can analyze and act on it to convert means that they're the perfect solution. Whether your scale is from your first million to your first billion, Klaviyo will set you up for success on that journey. So just visit klaviyo.com/secret leaders. That's klaviyo.com/secret leaders today to find out more. And if you're fed up of scrolling through jobs on LinkedIn, I think you're going to love Otter. They've handpicked the most exciting jobs at tech companies in London. Now, many of these fantastic companies are being featured on Secret Leaders already, and they've got job openings on Otter too. For example, Slack, Bulb, GoCardless, and Deliveroo. So, Otter is building a place for smart, ambitious people to find their new career challenge. Just find out more at otter.com, that's OTTA.com, and find your new job there. Now to today's show. Hello, I'm Dan Murray-Serter, and this is Secret Leaders. We invite the most impactful business people onto the show to find out how they've overcome their biggest challenges so you can learn their lessons the easy way. Today's secret leader is Daniel Schreiber, the co-founder and CEO of Lemonade. The insurtech startup launched in late 2016 and floated on the New York Stock Exchange in July this year during the pandemic, when its valuation more than doubled on the first day of trading. Their product is famous for using AI and behavioral science to make quick decisions and offer a super slick user experience, while Daniel is famous for being outspoken on hotly charged political topics that most CEOs run a mile from. Now, Daniel, before we get going properly, we always start with a quick fire round. So, cats or dogs?
Dogs.
New York or Tel Aviv?
That's a tricky one, but if I'm forced, I'd say Tel Aviv. It's a close
Lemonade or Coke?
That's easy.
Say Fanta.
Yeah.
Private company or public company?
Public.
More guns or more gun control? I'm just kidding. Right, you're stuck on a desert island and you can take three things. What are they?
Nothing particularly exciting there. I'd take family photos and videos. I like watching photos of the kids and videos of the kids growing up. I'd take some books and a comfortable pair of shoes.
Yeah, I feel like that's quite practical. I'm trying to compare it to like some other answers that we've had. But okay, so are you quite a nostalgic person then?
I guess so.
Yeah. Well, then it's a perfect place to start. What was your childhood like?
My childhood was a happy one.
Where did you grow up?
All over the place. So I'm kind of cosmopolitan. The remnants of an English accent are because I was born in the UK to British-born parents. So London was kind of home. But at the age of 2 already, I moved to California. My dad went to Stanford and then worked at HP for a bit. And at the age of 4, so I came back. And at the age of 5.5, my parents moved us to Israel. So it was like my third continent move. And I spent my childhood years there. But my grandfather back in London passed when I was 13. And my dad was an only son and took over the business that was left to run back in London. So my secondary schooling was back in the UK. So I feel a bit of a citizen of the world and certainly cosmopolitan from my upbringing.
And were there any sort of this classic question of nurture, nature, what drives the entrepreneurial mindset? Were there entrepreneurs in your family?
Yeah, definitely. I got entrepreneurship kind of with my mother's milk. So my father was, and my grandfather before him. So my grandfather came to the UK as a refugee from Vienna, escaping the Holocaust, lost all his family, and came with my grandmother penniless to the UK and started from nothing and ended up building a sizable business in the UK. Your older listeners may remember Schreiber Furniture. That was my grandfather, hasn't been around now for a while. So yeah, absolutely grew up with the spirit of entrepreneurship on a multi-generational basis.
And do you feel like, was there ever this aspect of being pushed into that kind of career path? Like what were your motivations as a kid? Were you rebellious? Were you studious? Were you destined to go to a top university? Were you kind of like go figure it out on your own?
No, so I wasn't pushed. In fact, I kind of didn't want to do that. I ended up getting a law degree from King's College London, and thought I want to make my living by being a professional rather than being a businessman, so to speak. That was kind of my rebellion.
Daniel Schreiber is a very good lawyer's name, I'll be honest.
There you go. I was a lawyer for all of 5 minutes, but that was kind of where I went to. And no, I wasn't studious. I remember my mum coming back from parents' evening, my parents coming back from parents' evening in the 4th grade in tears, literally in tears. And the refrain that they would always hear is that I am capable, but I do not apply myself. And that was the dictum that kind of accompanied me throughout my childhood. And I scraped by at A-level. I got to my tremendous relief in ABC. And I was probably very close to doing much, much worse than that. And by the skin of my teeth got into King's College because I didn't have the grades to get in there, but I was, by that time, a mature student. I'd served in the military. I did other things first. And it was the only university that would even call me for interview. So, a one of one. So it ended up with a happy ending academically, but it didn't look that way if you asked my 16-year-old self what it would be like. It wasn't very promising.
Yeah. Also, I guess would your 16-year-old self be really surprised that you've ended up in insurance?
Yeah, I don't really think of myself as being in insurance.
No, I'm quite aware, but still.
Yeah.
You've got to pick a niche, right? And this is the niche that you've chosen to apply behavioral science and technology to. So
true that, yeah. And when my kids want to engage in the conversation, when they ask, what does your dad do? Then they'll tell them about Lemonade. And otherwise they just say he works in insurance, and that's a conversation stopper. So
you must be so irritated. You're like, what? Why did we go through the script before we went out this evening? Like, I told you what to say. Behavioral science.
It's all good.
Okay, so before Lemonade was even a consideration, and after you've, I'm assuming, passed from King's College with flying colours at this point, sort of started to find your feet, there's a big gap. What happened in that gap? What were you doing in your life?
Between high school and...
No, between King's College and founding Lemonade.
Oh, sorry. So while I was at university, I met my wife, Daniela, and we married. And as soon as she became a psychologist, she went to UCL, I was at King's College. As soon as we finished our degrees, we moved to Israel. And while we made our home here, we're both from London originally, we've since twice moved to California. We have 3 boys, one of whom has 3 passports because he was born in California to British-born parents who adopted Israel as their home. So we continued the kind of moving around the world theme.
I mean, he literally is the marriage material, like no other.
Don't let him hear that.
No, fair enough.
And I left law. I became a qualified attorney, but I practiced law for less than a year before starting my first startup in the late 1990s. And at that time, it was kind of the height of the bubble. And if you were inexperienced and unqualified and young, those were perfect credentials for raising venture capital and starting a first startup. And I took advantage of that and started my first startup in 97, I want to say, and ran that through to late 2002 when it was sold in a bit of a fire sale, 2002, as that tipped over into 2003. And then spent the next bunch of years at a company that became SanDisk. It was working for a company that invented really the USB flash drive. And then my only enduring contribution there was the relationship with SanDisk, which matured into an acquisition in 2006. They bought the company for $1.6 billion. At a time that was a big number. I think it still is, but it was rather unusual at the time. And I've been
SanDisk, which this audio is being recorded on right here as well. So a brand that's endured amazingly.
Oh yeah, a fabulous company, and I had just a stunning time there. Really, one of the highlights of my career working for that company. I had a tremendous amount of fun. I got to run the MP3 business at a time that the iPod was the consumer electronics device of choice before the iPhone came along. And for 5 minutes in my career, I was kind of cool because we built that business into the largest MP3 business after Apple, which meant that the music studios and labels and everybody who was interested in not being entirely beholden to Apple would be nice to us. So I got invited to the Emmys and Grammys and got all different kind of cool stuff that impressed my wife and impressed my kids and was kind of lost on me. But I enjoyed the local fame in my family there for a while.
Okay, so you've gone through this sort of, highs and lows of entrepreneurship already, taken advantage, like you say, of market timing and like the complete lack of any kind of experience, which anyone worth their salt knew to take opportunity of in that period in their lives, also that period in the world. Like you say, had a bit of a flash sale of the company. I mean, has it given you, some kind of like financial safety though? So you say fire sale, was it, fire sale was in good numbers and but nothing for the founders because of all the preference stock? Or was it, something that you could actually build a base on financially and start to look for something more creative in your career next?
No, it was a fire sale. We had a wonderful exit lined up with Microsoft. We had the term sheet, we had everything. And then during the due diligence, they said, oh, we'll just build this ourselves. Thanks for nothing. And I went back to my board and I said, Microsoft are about to announce a competing product. And Microsoft is big today, but in 2002, they were just, dauntingly big. And so we quickly sold what was left of the company, only to find that Microsoft 10 months later went to the acquirer and licensed the technology from them. So it was one of those things that even when I reflect back on it now, I don't know how I could have maneuvered things better, because I obviously didn't maneuver them very well. But no, I didn't make any money in my first exit at all.
Okay, so your first real taste of opportunity, I guess, came from working with SanDisk and market timing.
Yeah, I think taste of opportunity there always was, and the highs and lows. SanDisk was kind to me, and it was a great ride and a lot of fun and a successful company. But it also had, its near death moments. In 2008, the stock plummeted. It went down. When I arrived, I think it was something like 45. It plummeted all the way down to like 6. There was a hostile takeover from Samsung that we resisted, and it looked pretty bleak there for a while. It did recover and it went all the way back up to 100. It's, one of those tales. But there is something fundamentally different about being, it doesn't matter if you're senior or not, being a hired hand in a company and not having been the founder. And I could sleep that much better during the highs and lows of SanDisk's experience than I could during my own startup. So I just had a lot of sleepless nights back then.
Yeah, of course, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so what made you leave?
The CEO retired. The founder of SanDisk became something of a mentor to me, Dr. Eli Harari, just a fabulous human being. And SanDisk was and remains a large company, a semiconductor player. And Eli, even decades after founding the company, would still kind of shake the branches and challenge me to be really entrepreneurial and subversive and to challenge the status quo. And that's what allowed me to still feel the joy of going to work, even though I was working for a Fortune 500 company. And I am really a startup person at heart, and I love the thrill of making stuff from scratch. And I had it there. And with his retirement, it was taken over by a wonderful leader, but it became what it fundamentally always was, which is a Fortune 500 chip maker, and lost some of its appeal to me personally. But that's, my own idiosyncrasies, nothing critical of the company.
So where did you go? What did you do? How did you spend your time?
So I took a position as the president of a company called Powermat. And Powermat was really pioneering the space of wireless charging. And I spent 4 years there really trying to advocate for the adoption of this technology, which ultimately was very successful. Every iPhone today comes with that technology. Every Samsung device comes with that technology. Cars come with it built in. But at the time, all of that was a pipe dream. And I was going to headquarters of Samsung in Korea and to Cupertino to speak to the Apple leadership, and managed to get Starbucks to implement it in all their coffee shops in North America. So that's really what I spent the next 4 or 5 years doing, is trying to get wireless charging adopted on a worldwide basis.
So where does all this experience lead up towards Lemonade? What is this moment? What is the spark that makes you think that the world needs what you built?
So I decided for various reasons to leave Powermat. This is in late 2014. And I was on what they call gardening leave, which is a fabulous thing if you can get it. It basically means they pay you, but you do nothing. Go do gardening. I didn't do that much gardening, but I did tidy up my study, and I took my kids on a skiing trip, and I cleared my mind after what was a very intense few years.
Should have done a kibbutz, really, being really on brand.
I prefer skiing, but there you go. And I went to something called Singularity University, which is a 1 week kind of intensive course in California, in Silicon Valley, and spent a while thinking about the future, broadly speaking, how technology impacts the future, exponential technologies, disruption, all that kind of stuff. And it was fabulous for me, because when I'm in something, I'm really blinkered. I get very focused on what I'm doing, and I needed the perspective before choosing what to do next. And I was thinking about my next startup, and one of the speakers there, Dr. Peter Diamandis, who's the chairman of the X Prize and has done some cool stuff, he was giving a talk. I don't remember what the talk was about, but there was some question. I don't remember what the question was. I don't remember what the answer was, but I remember it included the words peer-to-peer insurance. And I was all wound up looking for my next startup, and I'd never even thought of insurance. And that got me working on something that eventually became Lemonade. The funny thing is that after I met Shai, my co-founder, and we founded Lemonade, I reached out to Peter and I said, oh, we should have a coffee. I'm doing that thing that you mentioned in that lecture. And we met for coffee, and I explained to him what we're doing. And he says, oh, that's really cool. And that's not what I meant. What I meant was, and he had some DNA sequencing notion for health insurance. So I like to joke that Lemonade was one big misunderstanding, but that's how we came to found Lemonade.
That's great. And what I love as well is that it's so fascinating what things take us in what moment in our lives, because you were sitting there with one of the most fascinating people with the most incredible perspectives in the world, and you can't even remember anything else he said other than peer-to-peer insurance. It's just so unusual, and yet that's the thing that you cottoned onto. So fair play to your very unusually wired brain, but talk about hearing an opportunity and taking advantage of it. Okay, what year was that? And then talk us through the next couple of years, because your journey has been exceptionally fast by most people's standards. I actually remember, very oddly, but I was at an event in Sweden a couple of years ago in Stockholm called Brilliant Minds, and there was this big showcase for Lemonade. I don't know if you were there or not, but it was very unusual. This is the first time I'd seen it or whatever, and they were trying to showcase really interesting applications of fast-growing technology. And I was at the time a bit taken back by two things. One, cool name. Two, very, very beautiful looking product. User experience, I think, was the thing that really struck me, because as we know, that is not a place for user experience, the insurance game. So I know your journey's been fast. I also know that what listeners find so valuable, and listeners really vary from fellow public company founders and CEOs who've made it and want to hear how other people did it too, to people just starting up now. The speed of execution, I think, is fascinating, particularly because there's a big tech stack, and that's not easy to do quickly. So I'd love to know, from that idea, what were the first steps? What was that first year like? And then from that point, who were your first recruits, and how did you think about building the team to realize the vision?
Wow. Okay. First, I should say, and this will be an answer to a lot of your questions. Shai Wininger is the answer. Shai is my co-founder. And a lot of the things that went brilliantly well for us at Lemonade are really a tribute to my co-founder. He's really the brains of the operation. So the name, I had some ludicrous name lined up for the company. He came up with Lemonade. The user experience is all him. He's a rare combination of a world-class technologist and a world-class designer. He's got that Steve Jobs thing. I don't use that lightly. I've never said it of anybody, but he can get kind of focus in on the chamfer of the chatbot and the hue of the pink and the font and the, yeah. And I'm the native English speaker, but he won't let me near the microtext. He's Israeli born and bred, and yet he has the sensitivity to how to frame a message and then how to build a technology stack that will blast it out through AI, at an incredible rate and incredible precision. So
okay, actually, just to stop you there, before we actually get onto the question, then you're right. I've got good context on what Lemonade is and does, and listeners might not. Actually, just frame what is Lemonade as a consumer proposition. What do people see? Give us some context for people who are then going to go and check it out, obviously listening to it. But before we get into the brilliance, let's talk about what it is and does.
Sure. Lemonade is a new kind of insurance company. So we're built from scratch. We're vertically integrated. So we built every piece of technology, but also all of the licenses. We're not fronting for some old frumpy insurance company. We built every element of the user experience down to the insurance dimensions as well as the technological ones, absolutely from scratch. And we started that in late 2015. We'll come to that, I guess, in a minute. And today, Zoom, 5 years forward, we have 1 million customers, predominantly in the US, but we have launched in Europe as well. So we're live now in Germany, in Holland, and in France as well. And we offer renters insurance, homeowners insurance, pet insurance, and life insurance. And we keep adding new products. So it has been a pretty rapid growth. You're talking about, from standstill to about $200 million in just over 4 years, and doubling every year. So that's as long as we can keep that up, that gives you a sense of it. And it's built on a pretty different way of thinking than traditional insurance, perhaps because its founders know nothing about insurance. So we had to rely on what we knew, which is we went back and tried to ask ourselves the question, why do we and why does everybody else hate insurance? At a fundamental level, insurance is really a social good, right? Mathematically, it's about a pool of people coming together to share resources in order to help the weakest member in the hour of need. That is almost the textbook definition of a social good. But it's not how we think of insurance. The insurance is something that is characterized by deep distrust. Nobody believes the insurance company is actually going to pay them when they need to. And the insurance company doesn't trust you one iota either. There's this kind of symmetrical relationship of distrust, which we found fascinating, just intellectually stimulating. That why is that? And why is it that when you talk about fraud in insurance, you use the word fraud and you use it in other contexts, but you mean something quite different from it? Because usually when a tech company or any company is worried about fraud, they're worried about some hacker from the East or from somewhere else breaking into their system, stealing their credit cards or something like that. And in insurance, the people who are committing fraud are not those people. It's people like you and me, people who are upstanding citizens in other aspects of their life. And something about insurance brings out the devil in them and gives them license to misbehave, indeed, to lie and to embellish in their claims. And we try to, before founding Lemonade, try to get to the bottom of that. What is it about insurance that brings out the devil in people? And early on, as we were founding the company, I reached out, I really badgered 2 Nobel laureates, one in behavioral economics and one in game theory, and just left them messages until eventually they returned my call if I promised kind of to stop calling. And really tried to dig in to understand what it is about insurance that is so counterintuitive and counter to its fundamental goodness. And what we discovered was that if I had to distill it down to one thing, it's a conflict of interest. It's the business model. It's something foundational. It's the fact that you pay me money in order to help you when you have a kitchen fire. But if I pay you those £10,000, you're 10,000 richer, I'm 10,000 poorer. And if I deny your claim, I will end the year better off. And that creates all manners of ill. And that you sense, even if you can't put voice to it, you sense that there is this conflict, there is an asymmetry of information, there is an asymmetry of power because I have your money and you don't. And all these things give us license to level the playing field. So you will embellish your claim. Obviously not you, but one will embellish their claim.
I was like, wow, this guy's really done his research on
yeah. And then the insurance company will suspect you of that of which you are in fact guilty and will treat you like the criminal that you might just be. And then you resent that. And then this tit for tat develops and this whole thing spirals onwards and downwards. So we founded Lemonade, as I say, from the ground up, but on a different business model. And we said, how can we build an insurance company that we would like to deal with? And what we ended up doing is saying, well, to do that, I have to take a flat fee. I have to, at least at first blush, disassociate my financial incentives from whether or not I pay your claims. Now, I don't know how many claims there'll be this year. So you say, how can you possibly do that? And what we've done is establish a business where you pay me your premiums. And for every pound that you pay me, I tell you in advance, I'm going to keep 25 pennies on the pound. So 25% goes to me as a flat fee, as it were. Now, I don't know how many claims are going to come in, so I need two ballasts that are going to stabilize that 25%. One is called reinsurance. So we buy something called reinsurance, which basically says if there are more claims that would have eaten into our 25%, somebody else is going to pay those claims. And we sell off that element of the risk to reinsurers. It's some neat financial engineering, if you like, that means that even if there are many claims, we don't get hit by those additional claims. And we have something called a give back, a charitable give back, where we say to you, if there's money left over at the end of the year, if it was a good year, not a bad year, and the results were more favorable than they might have been, then rather than keeping that money ourselves and profiting and being tempted to deny your claim in order to increase that percentage, we tell you right now that's going to charity. Hey, why don't you, Dan, choose a charity that's near and dear to your heart? And suddenly that changes everything. We've actually, from a game theory perspective, we've changed this from a 2-person game to a 3-person game. Now you've got the non-profit in the room. I don't make money by denying your claims because I put that money out of my reach anyway. It's going to charity. So why would I screw you over in order to gain money that I don't keep? I'm not going to do that. In fact, my incentives flip from denying your claim to paying it as quickly as I can so that I lower my costs and get the NPS hit, and you'll tell your friends all about it. And your incentives might change as well. And this is really where the behavioral economics kicks in. Today, you're happy to embellish your claims because you'll stick it to the man. You've got a conflicted relationship with this nameless, faceless behemoth. But if you know that, and we do remind you of this when you make a claim, that embellishing your claim doesn't hurt the insurance company about whom you don't care. It hurts a charity about whom you do care. That may change your behavior as well. And that has created a whole new way of thinking about insurance. We end up paying claims very, very quickly because the final piece of the puzzle is you take that novel business model, those foundations that are unconflicted, that have social good built into them, that align our interests with those of our customers, and then you build a technology stack above that. Because as soon as my incentive isn't to deny your claim, it's to pay it quickly. Well, how do I use technology to do that? And we pay our claims incredibly fast. Our median time to pay a claim is a day. And about 1/3 of our claims are paid instantaneously, on the spot, algorithmically, without any human intervention. And we do the same thing when selling you insurance. There's no brokers, there's no paperwork, there's no faxes. It's a 90-second chat with a bot. That's the median time to buy a policy on Lemonade. So really transforming the whole experience, but not just by sticking a technology layer in front of a technology facade in front of a 100-year-old edifice, but really going back down to the foundations and building the whole thing from scratch.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Great context. And literally, I'm assuming that my response there is very similar to how other people feel, which is like, I'm glad you just said launched in Europe because I want that. That sounds great. And I feel the frustration. You're right. It's just one of those industries. I literally this year made my first ever insurance claim for 10 years and it was denied. And it was a petty thing. It was like 400 or 500 quid. And I've never had anything that I've needed to claim once. And I was like, I can't believe I've been paying like whatever it was, £700 a year every year for like 10 years. And I had a claim of £400 and it was denied. I was so livid. So you're completely right. And I think a lot of people resonate with that. And it is a classic example, it's a classic story of disrupting a market by pulling apart all the different bits and asking what is left and what is the underlying emotional attachment that people have to the industry. And that's usually where these businesses thrive. However, when I hear this, I can't help but think of the incredible war chest you'd have to pull off something like this. So it's one thing to have a big vision, and it's another thing, of course, to have the execution. But in a game like insurance, you also have to make sure you don't go bust, and your calculations and measurements are as exact and precise as they need to be for your own safety, not just for good NPS hits. So this is now the perfect time to unpack how we built Lemonade. So let's start from I guess the first question, the first year. So you've come out of this, you found Shai, and then what? You're looking at like size of the market, what's wrong. Like, take us through it. Take us through a thought experiment of how and the next genius might pull apart the market and build the next Lemonade in another category.
Wow. So we didn't do what you might expect. What you might expect, the smart thing to do is probably to learn something about insurance, because neither of us had ever worked in insurance. We both had 20 years of entrepreneurship behind us in the tech field. Shai had founded Fiverr, another very successful tech company. So we knew consumer-centric innovation, we knew technology, we knew sharing economy, but we did not know insurance. And, you know, through the serendipity of Peter mentioning some throwaway comment that kind of triggered things in my mind, we ended up focusing on insurance. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is something that is 11% of GDP, $5 trillion worldwide, 100% household penetration. And you're like, wow, this has been hiding in plain sight. It's such a dull industry that nobody's noticed it. Nobody's thought to tackle it. And like so many industries that uses scary words, actuarial stuff, funny bookkeeping. I remember being told it's so impenetrable that only Warren Buffett can invest in insurance because nobody can understand what's going on in insurance. And people, you know, aren't you scared to take on insurance, all that kind of stuff. So it had this kind of scariness to it. And one of the pieces also was tremendous capital. You need a lot of capital. So what Shai and I did is, to start with, we did not learn about insurance. We actually pretty consciously resisted the temptation to look up insurance on Wikipedia and start reading. And instead, we took some office space with a whiteboard, and we spent a couple of months just asking ourselves the question of, you know, first principles thinking. What do we not like about insurance? How would we build an experience that we felt good about? And we figured we know there's a lot of actuarial stuff, and you know, we had high school probability theory, or at least Shai did, to kind of keep us somewhat sensible. But we didn't want to study about how insurance actually works, because it's hard to unknow that kind of thing as well. And if you want first principles thinking, use your ignorance for all it's worth. And we really did that. So we sketched out on whiteboards and all that kind of stuff, how we thought a great insurance experience would be, what the business model would look like, etc. And frankly, that bears more than a passing resemblance to what we look like now, 5 years later. You know, a lot changed, but the core did not. And then when we emerged from that room, we went and spoke to some venture capitalists, some of whom we knew, some of whom we didn't. And it really was just the two of us and a PowerPoint. We hadn't developed any technology. We didn't have any licenses. We did have a couple of people who said they would join us if we got funded. Professor Dan Ariely, the eminent behavioral economist, joined us as a founding team member. Ty Sagler, who was a well-known persona in the insurance world in America, said he'd join us as our chief insurance officer. So by that point, we had kind of the skeletal outline of what a core team could look like. And we went and raised $13 million in a seed round. Sequoia and Aleph, the two funds that funded us. And you're right, this was, you know, Sequoia's been around since I think 1972, something like that. This was the largest seed round in the history of Sequoia. So you do need to raise more money than you otherwise would in a seed round. And
I'm also reminded at this point, you know, the very famous anecdote of Picasso drawing that, you know, picture for the lady that stops him in the street, and he's like, took you 30 seconds, that'll be 30,000 euros. And she's like, well, how could it cost that much? It took you 30 seconds. Like, no, it's taken me 50 years or whatever it is. Very similar scenario with you guys, right? Which is, you can't really be a college grad and come out and say, I'm going to disrupt insurance, and we've done first principle thinking, and this guy is a genius, and this is how we'll do it, and we need $13 million seed round. Because ultimately, yes, you can be smart enough to unpick these things, but this is a game of execution as well. So there is a massive part to play here in both of your careers and both of your experiences. And, a fire sale and all of the different things that will come from, the attraction of working with a Sequoia won't just go down into how you can disrupt an industry, but also the lessons you've learned and accumulated together at that point.
Yeah, you're right, of course. And to be honest, we were fairly conscious of that. So when we were thinking about what kind of company did we want to build, we wanted to build one where the barriers are really high, where we're cognizant that we may or may not clear the hurdle, but that if we don't, it means that it's really tough. And indeed, even if we do, maybe not everybody else can. So the gray hair would be an advantage. If you were founding a Pokemon Go, any college kid who has the idea can execute that. We did know that getting licensed by the great state of New York requires real gray hair, real money, real personas, real resumes. So part of our decision, which industry to go after and in what structure, the idea that we would actually establish insurance carriers, we felt would winnow out, would kind of shrink the universe of potential competitors considerably. So that was something that we consciously did.
Yeah, okay. So you've taken $13 million from Sequoia. You've brought on board some amazing team members. What year was this? And then what?
So it's still 2015, the summer of 2015. And then we started working. So we incorporated, I think it may have been July or something of that year, and hired a team and started developing the technology while applying concurrently for our licenses. Now the technology, both the licenses and the technology have a funny kind of story to them. The technology, we had a make versus buy decision. So a lot of people told us in general, we were advised by everybody, don't establish your own insurance carrier. You guys don't know insurance, stick to your knitting, partner with an insurance carrier, and you do the technology stuff. That's what you guys know how to do. And we felt in our bones that that was not right, and that there would be a really low glass ceiling if we were beholden to some large insurance carrier. And I'm really glad.
And against your intentions to find all the hurdles.
Yes. Although erecting hurdles that don't also add value doesn't really help you. You have to find things that really does change the nature of the game. But both in foresight and definitely in hindsight, we felt that establishing our own carrier, owning the full stack, being able to build the business model that we wanted, the risk profiles that we wanted, understand the plumbing of insurance, we felt there was a lot of value there, and maybe we'll come back to it, but I think we were right. But that meant going to New York in our case and applying for a license, which was a saga I'll come to in a second. And then we had to start building the technology. And there again, people said to us, listen, add value by all means, but don't build the stuff that's already been built. Here are 10 vendors that can offer you policy management and customer management, all these kind of things. And we went off and Shai started meeting with all of these different vendors. And I remember him coming up really flummoxed and bemused from these meetings. And I remember at one point he says to me, Daniel, and they all told us these are 18-month implementations, multi-million-dollar license fees. And we felt, well, there must be so much that we just don't know in order to justify such a long development cycle, such a hefty price, which for us would have been, exorbitantly expensive. And Shai comes out of the 6th meeting and he says to me, Daniel, either I'm just not getting it, or I could code this thing on my Apple Watch while I'm driving home tonight. Now, he couldn't quite do it on his Apple Watch while he's driving home tonight, but not far off. A team of 5 people stood up an entire policy management system in 5 months. So we had the basics, the user experience, the outline of what you said you saw and loved was ready pretty quickly. We kept adding to it. Of course, you get the basics, and then oftentimes you have to backfill a lot of the stuff that you cut corners on, and you get the product debt and technical debt. But the license wasn't coming. And the thing with insurance is you can't beta test this stuff. You need a license, and it needs to be a real product. You can't just launch it and hope for the best. You go to jail for that kind of thing. And the great state of New York was just ignoring our application. And I had an interesting moment where I was sitting in an office in New York, 100 meters from the regulators who wouldn't meet with us even. And I got an emissary from 10 Downing Street. She had come to New York in search of companies that should really launch in the UK. And she said to me, Daniel, if New York's giving you a hard time, you'll be received with open arms in London. Why don't you come? And so we developed a plan B, which was to launch in the UK. And I did come to London, and I was hosted in 10 Downing Street, which was a big deal for me. And I remember the pitch was a pretty compelling one, which is the United Kingdom is, the great connector both to the United States and the gateway to Europe.
And where insurance comes from, Scotland, if I'm not mistaken.
And the seat of insurance, Lloyd's of London, it's one of the great financial centers of the world. And they said to me at the time, listen, the one thing, next week we've got this Brexit vote, but we'll just get beyond that and then all will be well. Famous.
Oh yeah, I actually forgot about Brexit. That's been and gone, right?
So things didn't quite, David Cameron at the time was optimistic and it didn't quite play out the way he'd hoped. And then in the meantime, we did manage to there's a whole chapter in a book written by a guy called Bradley Tusk. The book is called The Fixer, about how we had to work to get New York to take us seriously and ultimately to give us a license. But that was a near-death experience, which ended well. And we have a license and we've got a great relationship with our regulators. But that was genuinely tough. And the whole company could have kind of died before it began if things hadn't worked out the way they did.
What happens in something like that? So let's just say that you do want to launch an outrageously ambitious company where the government, or financial institutions have to be involved. You talk about near-death experience. I mean, how do you turn them from not paying attention to you to paying attention? Like, are there tactics? Is it turning up? Is it letter every single day? Is it, like you mentioned, a fixer? Is it like people that know people?
Yeah, so we rather naively for the first 6 months or whatever it was, felt that this is just a legal bureaucratic process. You have to submit your paperwork and wait like good boys and girls and you'll get your response and then you'll back and forth. And we met this guy, Bradley Tusk, who became an investor and an advisor. And he said, no, this is all politics. This is not formalities. This is politics. The insurance regulation reports to the governor, and the governor is an elected politician, and you have to bring pressure to bear. And we felt at the time we had little to lose and everything to gain. And we spoke to the governor's office and the regulators, and we said, listen, guys, we are going to launch. If you respond to our application, and we weren't asking them to cut corners or to do anything untoward, just to take us seriously, just to give us the time of day. And we basically said, on this day, we've booked 3 speaking engagements, which I had. And we said, we're either going to speak about how New York is closed to business and to innovation, or we'll talk about how we're launching Lemonade. And it's your choice. And by the way, here's the full page ad that we're taking out at the cost of $100,000 in the New York Times. And this is what it looks like. And here's the tweet that Sequoia plans to issue. And here's the change.org campaign that they plan to launch. And ball's in your court. This is the date. This is when it all happens. And a day before that date, I got a phone call from the regulator saying we're ready to engage with you.
Amazing. That is fantastic. I'm so glad I asked, because you're about to move straight on. But this is the crunch time. This is where the moments of great entrepreneurship hang on, pivotal stories in a company's history. And there's always another way of finding out, how to make that change and how to turn someone's mind. And yeah, sometimes the public pressure. And again, thank God you did have the capital, because being able to take out $100,000 page ad is such an important high leverage opportunity for you. Those things can't go to waste, and there's no point having the war chest on product and nothing on marketing if you can't leverage those moments. So thank you for sharing. Okay. You've got your license. You're ready to roll. How big is the team? Take us through like the next, I guess, I mean, because it's such a short journey up until this point. So I guess take us through the next couple of years. So you've managed to do the impossible and got some appetite for changing the industry. Then what?
Yeah, so we got the license ultimately in September of 2016 and launched a few days later, September 21st, 2016. I think we had 19 people on the team at the time, something like that. And we all got together in the same room in WeWork in downtown New York and pressed the button. And we all had kind of bets going about how many policies would we sell on our first day. It ended up being 100 or 99 or something like that, which was higher than anybody dared hope for. And we start off with renters insurance and homeowners insurance only in New York. The United States, unfortunately, is 51 separate jurisdictions when it comes to insurance. Europe is not. Europe is one license gets you 31 countries. But in the US,
and guess which country is not going to be part of that one anymore. Anyway, back to you.
Yes. So we started selling and we got the basics up and running, customers coming in. It was as exhilarating as could possibly be. And as I say, you can't beta test this stuff. So you don't really know what to expect. And this all along while you're building it, you do have this question, will the dog eat the dog food? Are you solving a problem? You spoke earlier about this pain point and we felt it and we thought that we had empathically designed a product that would address it. But we were holding our breath because we had no real world feedback to suggest that we were right as of yet. And fairly early on, we knew that we did. The word of mouth spread quickly. The reception was fantastic. The reviews, the press, consumers were all really favorable to gushing. So it was just a huge sense of relief more than anything else that we'd raise all this money, hire these people, develop this technology, and it wasn't for naught. And then we started advertising and getting our Google AdWords and Facebook, and we started putting money behind it and started seeing the growth really kick off. And we went, over the next couple of years, we started getting licenses in other states, not yet internationally, but we started growing. During our first year, we got California and Illinois, and I think Texas. So some of the big kind of anchor states. We very much wanted to have the bookends of the United States, New York and California, the tech center, the finance center. And we felt we could fill in the middle as we go. And we saw rapid growth and the team had to grow very quickly. We kept having to hire. We went from 0 to $100 million run rate in 3 years, which is breakneck speed and unheard of in insurance, but even in the world of fast growing tech companies, it's a little bit of an outlier. Slack achieved something similar, but not that many companies have. So all of the challenges of growth, of growing at, during those years, 500% compounded annual growth rate, keeping the culture alive, adding people so that at any given time, most of the employees haven't been with you for a year, all those kinds of challenges. But it was an absolute thrill, raising money along the way so we could keep doubling down and developing new geographies, new products, etc.
Okay. So so many questions, because as someone who has, albeit launched his startup very, very wisely, January the 6th, 2020, what a year to launch a company. I have to say, like, the thing that it's interesting, like having failed a company and I think hiring too fast. I was young, but hiring too fast and not spending enough time on key hires and really questioning the leadership level of those employees. And their ability to therefore help me delegate and therefore obviously speed up. To this time round, I appreciate this, and it's been during COVID and it's on Zoom and it's all very different anyway. But the thing that I am just so in awe of when I speak to people like yourself is that speed of hiring and the gut instinct of knowing that these are the right people. Because a couple of my colleagues, I've spent 4 or 5 months hiring that one role. And almost all my time as the co-founder of Heights has literally been spent interviewing, and obviously some legal admin. So I just don't get it. As in, what is the trick that I'm missing? Is it experience? Is it that you already knew loads of people that would be perfect for a bunch of leadership roles? I mean, I'd love to just unpack that, how you hire the right team and infrastructure for scale, because definitely the thing I've still not mastered. Speed on that.
No, I don't know that we have any secret source on that, to be honest. So I wrote a blog post after our third year in market, and so I don't know if this has changed in the last year, but I checked, and it looked like we had interviewed over 100 people, or at least reviewed resumes of over 100 people for every one person we hired.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean that basically resonates exactly, which is why I just always am amazed at being able to hire hundreds of people. Right, that's the thing. I'm like, yeah, because there's some, again, so there's so much to consider. There's values, there's culture fit, there's ability to execute, there's growth, there's all of these things. It's just hard to do those things sincerely and properly and get it right more often than not.
And I think for our case, certainly in the early days, we had a burning concern about, we were melding two cultures. We were coming from the tech scene and the high-tech startups and all the stuff that characterizes a tech startup. But we were going into insurance, and we needed to hire quite a few people who come from that world. And that is a very far removed kind of world. And I used to talk a lot in the early days about the black hole. I used to tell everybody, we have not yet achieved escape velocity from the insurance way of thinking. And we're going to keep having people, just like people told us, don't create your own insurance company and just use this software. And we're going to continuously be told to do things the old way. And we have to continuously be cognizant and on the lookout for those pieces of advice, because it will be the path of least resistance, and we have to resist it. And that also manifested in the hiring. How do you hire people out of the world of insurance who are massively accomplished and bring them on board to cut off the very branch on which they sat and to rethink the things that they've known no other way of doing things? And in the early days in my job descriptions, I actually made a requirement, and when you put all the requirements, one of them said, it literally said this, midlife crisis. That was one of the requirements for the job. And I kind of said that if you're happy in the corner office of one of the large insurance companies, you're not right for us and we're not right for you. We need somebody who's sitting there saying, what the hell am I doing with my life? And they should apply. And I remember when we announced some of our insurance hires, TechCrunch wrote a piece on it. And they said that they mentioned the names of the people that we hired. And it says a lot of our readership won't know these people, but these are the Satya Nadellas and the Brins of the insurance world. And I went into the office and I showed it to the insurance guy. I said, hey guys, you've got to see this piece. You've been likened to Satya and to Brin. And they look at me and they go, who's Satya, who's Brin? So, and that was kind of my moment. I realized, wow, how far removed these worlds are from one another. But then you do get to a pace and to a place where I think you get to a critical mass. And there you start being attractive to a self-selecting group of people who apply. And you have teams who have imbued the ethos of the place and can help find and recruit and onboard. And on some point, the culture becomes, I don't want to say entirely self-sustaining, you can never be blasé about it, but it does get easier.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm, just like I've already said, but just incredibly impressed at the ability to scale teams that fast. And, during the last year as well. So we're going to come on to the last year where you decided to IPO and you did your roadshow from this very room that we're talking to you in right now, which, having spoken to many founders before who've had to do roadshows, much better pleasant experience and probably a lot better for the planet because they had to get on planes every, it seems, 12 hours to do it. So was that one of the motivations behind doing the IPO, that you realized that doing it this year would probably be best on your health and mental health and family life and everything else, so you might as well? Or was there more to it? And before we get onto the IPO, how much had you actually raised at this point, putting you in a comfortable position, obviously, to satisfy the growth? Because again, you can't have millions of customers if you can't afford to pay out the insurance. So what was your well, I was going to say bank balance like, but maybe I will stick with that as far as you're willing to share.
Yeah, sure. We
Public company.
Public company, and we publicized a lot of these things along the way. And frankly, when you're an insurance carrier, you're pseudo-public before you're public, because you're a regulated financial institution. You have to publish a lot of information that startups generally don't share. And we turned that into a virtue, and we started from day one. We call them transparency chronicles, and we would just publish every few months kind of inside information about Lemonade, and we defaulted to sharing more rather than less from the very get-go. We had raised over $400 million, in answer to the question. So our largest investor still is SoftBank, not the Vision
They
Fund.
must be delighted to actually have a win.
Yeah, the tides have turned for them in general in the last few weeks. DoorDash and others have been very good for them.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm thrilled that Lemonade was on the right side of the ledger for them and has been a handsome return to them so far. I have to say they've been spectacular investors to us, and having them in our corner when you're up against insurance carriers with more money than God, and suddenly you turn up. It's kind of you feel like you're turning up to a gunfight with a knife, but suddenly when you've got SoftBank in your corner, that changes. That creates a real thud factor. That
I was going to say, Son has more money than God, doesn't he? So it's all right.
Exactly. So we were thrilled to have him in our corner, and that was very helpful. General Catalyst had invested in us beforehand. So we had in general a roster of not only deep-pocketed and supportive, but really fabulous investors who were all on our board and have all become really good friends to Shai and myself. We feel very privileged to have them on our side. They've been just spectacular. They really have.
So you've got a good war chest. What's the logic in going public? Was that always the plan?
I'm not a huge believer in plans. I do like planning, but
yeah, I used this on the other day. But the famous quote of planning invaluable, the plan's waste of time.
Yeah, so I do believe that as we get bigger, the ability to forecast the future gets a little bit better because we've got more history to go on. But in the early days, it's a nonsense. In fact, it was one of my filters when we were going around to the early seed round, and Sequoia and Aleph ended up investing. But any VC at the time who asked me for a 5-year plan, I wouldn't take a second meeting with. I was like, okay, they just don't get it. And that changes over time. As the business matures, you have more ability to forecast. So I wouldn't say that an IPO was always the plan, but it was always something that I was open to. And I developed an approach which really says it's good, it's healthy for companies, for small, young companies to IPO. And my pattern goes something like this. You look back at, well, I'll interrupt myself and say this. 2019 was meant to be a blockbuster year for tech IPOs. It wasn't. Uber went public and all these other, and WeWork imploded and everything else. And it ended up, the IPOs of 2019 under-delivered relative to the market in a way not seen since 1995, so in a generation. And looking at that, I was trying to kind of figure out what was going on. Where did it all go so very wrong? And then I looked into it and found that some of the most iconic brands in the tech sector, the Microsofts, the Apples, the Amazons, they all went public young. And they had to, because there was no SoftBank. There was no huge, endless pools of late-stage venture capital that will give you multi-billion-dollar checks. So if you wanted to keep growing, the public markets were the place to go. And those companies all went public at about their 4th year at about $100 million of run rate. Some more, some less, but spitting distance to where we were. And in fact, in 1999, the average age of a company going public was 4 years old. 10 years later, it was already 14 years old. And the tables had really turned, and I wasn't sure that that was to the benefit of anybody. Sure, there was a lot of money available, and you could stay in the cozy cove of venture capital for longer. But it felt to me, kind of as a parent, you have this challenge of how much do you coddle your kids, and at what point do you want them to be exposed to the real world so that they grow up independent and strong and resilient? And I think that metaphor carries over to venture as well. And I felt that looking at the class of 2019 without pointing fingers or naming names, it reminded me a little bit of extended adolescence. The 25, 30-year-old who is still at home, still needs mommy and daddy, and whose parents did him or her no favor by coddling them for as long as they did. And these companies did all the growth in private. Oftentimes that led them to have not the best practices, not the best disciplines, not the best culture, a lot of bro culture and other kind of Me Too moments that came out of those companies as well. And then at some point they heave themselves onto the public markets, who have no interest in them at that point because they've burnt the opportunity with other investors. And therefore they weren't rewarded by the IPO market, and therefore they couldn't continue to grow with IPO money. And the feedback loop that had served Apple and Microsoft and Amazon so well, of you go early, you reward your public investors, you can then go back to them and continue to fuel your growth. They broke that cycle. So for all of those reasons, I felt that even though it's easier and it would have been cheaper, we could have raised more money for less dilution in the private markets. I'll tell you that to a certainty, and with greater certainty. And yet we chose to go public while we had $400 million or more in the bank. We weren't doing it for the money. We were doing it because we think in 20-year increments. And when you ask yourself the question, not what is good for the next quarter or 2 quarters, but we want to build an iconic 21st century incarnation of an insurance company, what is the right platform upon which to do that? What will be the best long-term kind of train tracks upon which to launch this thing? And it has to be the public markets. You may get more dilution, there may be more volatility, and if you're prone to look at the share price, that can drive you insane. But if you keep your eye on the prize, I think that is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great analogy, and it's interesting because 2020 has been a surprise breakout year for loads of tech firms, but many of them have been going for a lot longer than 4 years as well. But then I suppose their IPO prices have also been rewarded for that too.
And what a surprise that was. We in January, before COVID became a term that anybody had heard of, we got together with the bankers who ultimately took us public, and we said, okay, Q3 is probably the right time to try and go for various reasons. We had various milestones we wanted to hit. So we said, okay, let's open calendars. March 24th, we'll have what's known as the org meeting, which is the kickoff meeting for an IPO. And when March 24th came along, it seemed like the most ludicrous thing to even think of going public. The day before, March 23rd, in retrospect, I can tell you, was the low point in the stock market. The S&P was 35% off. NASDAQ was at 6,800 points. Everything had fallen day after day after day, and the sky was falling. And we sit there at this org meeting, and I feel so apologetical. I say, look, guys, we said we'd get together, so we're getting together. We'll kick this off because we said we'll kick it off, but obviously there's not going to be an IPO anytime soon. And little did we know that the next 50 days, that day turned out to be the turning point. And the next 50 days were the best 50 days in the stock market's history. And suddenly the window was wide open, and we actually pulled in the date and ended up going public earlier than we'd even planned to. So one never knows. It's been a crazy year.
Like you said, plans useless.
Yeah.
But in this case, a little touch of good fortune and your timing as well. And obviously a lot of success is that, right? It's this great vision, brilliant execution, and the timing needs to be there as well. And I mean, like they said, you could have by coincidence have tried to IPO in March, and it would have been a disaster. You did it in the summer, and it was over 100%, 130% on launch day.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we've got an understanding of the story, and thank you very much for sharing the journey of Lemonade. So the last part of the interview is just to understand a little bit more about you and things that you've learned in your career. And also, I know you're quite an outspoken person, like I said, follow you on LinkedIn. Most recently, thing that you said was, you're going to encourage 100% of your employees to get COVID vaccinations, and you think that every CEO should. Obviously a controversial statement, but I'd love to know where it comes from. What's the thinking behind it?
I don't think I'll say anything that will be new or surprising or particularly profound, but I do feel like we're experiencing at a global level a setback or a regression in terms of just understanding facts and factfulness and truth with a little t, and how decision making should be made. We've spent the last 400 years clawing our way out of the dark ages, developing methodologies for sieving fact from fiction, and
then Facebook came along.
Then Facebook came along. The political dynamics in the US, which just have driven a tremendous, alternative facts and all that kind of stuff, as if it's facts or just opinions. So Shai, we are cognizant of that. We've tried to build a company with a culture that is very data-driven. Statistics is the very core of all insurance. In the early days when people would say to us out of the insurance industry, oh, this feels like this, or we tend to do that, or we've really created a culture where we just don't accept that as a line of reasoning. You bring facts to the discussion, and if you don't have them, then you create tests in order to generate facts. But that's how we make decisions. COVID has just been, obviously massively disruptive on a global level. I've been tracking with bated breath the stunning success of science in cramming 10 years worth of vaccine development into 10 months. And everybody just lining up, the scientists and the pharmaceutical companies and the regulators. And they managed. And then to read that anything from 40 to 60 to 70% of the population says, nah, I don't trust that, was just shocking to me. People are dying at the moment. It's, the dark point of this whole pandemic, but people are dying at the rate of 500 per hour. In 3 months of this pandemic, 1 million lives will be lost. Now, up until now, I have not envied our leaders who have to choose between so many different evils, shutting down this and shutting down that. And how do you balance the lives lost versus school years and kids being in school and the loneliness of old people and all these things. But suddenly you have a vaccine that can relieve you of that horrible dilemma where whatever you choose to do is too little of something and too much of something else. And then for people to, with a blasé nonchalance, say, I don't trust it, without reading the articles, without doing the hard work, without understanding the data, just seemed to me kind of unforgivable. It's like, if you've got a real reason, fine, but otherwise, for goodness sake, there's a chance for all of us to end this. And I think that companies are in, and CEOs are in a position of influence, and to some extent, a position of power. And it is, I think, within my rights to say, I don't want people bringing a communicable disease into the office, particularly if they can easily avoid it by just rolling up their sleeves and getting a jab. And there better be a good reason if they're not willing to do that. There better be in some risk group that I'm not aware of, or have some exotic religious belief that is not one of the mainstream beliefs, because most religions are in favor of vaccination. And I do think that leaders need to stand up and say that. And anti-vaxxing or just a broad unease about vaccines isn't a good enough excuse when there's this much on the line.
Thank you very much for sharing. And I know, you've got strong opinions. I guess in this sense, strong opinions strongly held. But I guess, in other senses, to be a really strong leader, often you need strong opinions loosely held. So just to delve into that for a moment. What are some good examples of times in your career where, you've made a grand statement? It might be to your team, it might be to a colleague, and frankly, you've been proven wrong. And how do you deal with that kind of, ego damage when the role of the CEO is to kind of come with the facts and be confident in what you're saying?
Come with the facts and being confident with what you're saying aren't synonyms. I think the role of the CEO more than anything else is a storyteller. And it starts off, J.K. Rowling has to have a vision of Hogwarts. And it starts off with that. You have to have a vision of something that doesn't actually exist today, but you think might, unlike Hogwarts, might exist one day. And then you have to tell the story in a way that makes it tangible to your audience, that they can see it, they can smell it, they can touch it, they can feel it, and they have clarity of purpose of the destination that they're going towards. I think job one of a founder CEO is storytelling. And I don't, oftentimes people, you're telling stories, it sounds like you're trivializing things. I don't trivialize it. I put that on a pedestal as job one. you never want to lie or give people a false understanding. This is where we want to go. I'm not saying that we absolutely will get there. There is a decent chance of failure along the way. The odds are actually stacked against us, but wouldn't it be amazing if we managed to overcome those odds? So I do try not to set expectations that are fanciful, and also not to lie. And when I know that something is high risk, I'll stand in front of the team. I actually do every quarter. I tell the entire company what our goals are going to be for the quarter. We have a methodology known as OKRs, objectives and key results. And I tell them that I'm expecting about a 30% failure rate, that we're always going to set ourselves goals that may be not entirely achievable. And then I'm accountable to them, and I stand up every quarter and say, this is where we managed, this is where we failed. And this is why we failed, and this is what we've learned from it. So I fail a lot. I fail often. And sometimes it's on stuff that I saw coming, and sometimes it isn't. I don't think that undermines leadership. I honestly don't. I feel quite comfortable with that. Maybe I'll make a broader point. You didn't quite ask me this, but I think it fits into the segment. I think there's a stupendous amount of luck involved in all of these things. One of the things that I've come to believe over the years with increasing certainty is that a lot of stuff is uncertain, and that there's a lot of serendipity. And I think the luck comes in two levels, if you like. One is, we've spoken about the journey of Lemonade. There were so many forks in the road, and the stars aligned, and we managed to get the funding that we needed, and we managed to get the license. And I met Shai, and we launched before the competition, and we came up with the right name, and it was available, and we managed the IPO window open. The stars aligned for us. We had a lot of luck, a lot of serendipity, and it could have played out differently. One of the folks who invested in us in the seed round invested in my first startup in the 90s. He lost all his money back then. He's made something like 50 to 100 times a return on his money right now. I may have learned things along the year, but I may be 10% better. I'm not 100 times better. And the results are out of all proportion to whatever I've learned. And there's a chaos in the system. And small changes can have outlandishly big results for good and for bad. And I could have fallen flat on my face. And we've had what is so far been a spectacular success. And the distance between those two can be stunningly small. And the temptation in retrospect to attribute it all to all those smart things you did, I think misses a lot of the luck and serendipity and good fortune. And I think the good fortune runs deeper though, because even those things that are attributable to skill and wisdom and experience, and I don't dismiss those are important. Then you ask yourself the question, well, where did that come from? Where did you get those skills and that wisdom and that experience? Well, it's a combination of nature and nurture. That's the totality of us. And I didn't choose my nature and I didn't choose my nurture. So I was both of those are accidents of birth. So I think that one approaches all these things appropriately with I do reject the myth of the self-made man. I think that there's so much, as I say, that is down to good fortune in the community and family and all of that. So I approach what I do with a deep sense of humility, pride and joy and all of that, but also a deep appreciation that it could have been very, very different.
Yeah, and gratitude and recognition about where you came from and the sacrifices, like we talked about at the start, the sacrifices of your family and the opportunity you had to start in life. And starting with what sounded like quite a lot, but not too much that you might not be interested in doing other things. I mean, I completely agree with all of this stuff, right? As in, a lot of things conspire for and against us. Some privilege, but too much privilege. These are all things that will dictate the attitude that you go into the workforce with and how you apply yourself. So I'm completely with you on that. Whilst we've got you in this reflective state, then, what is, because I love asking this question because I learned so much as a leader from this. What is the most difficult feedback you've ever heard about yourself, and what did you do with it?
Early on, I remember in my first startup, the first time I had to fire somebody. It's ingrained, brandished into my memory, and I tortured the poor guy, and I was tortured in the process, and I took sleeping pills for a week and to kind of get through it. And I dragged out the process for so long because I just didn't have that. And then I was beating around the bush and hoping that he'd just get the hint, and seeing that process left an impression on me. And I have tried to be very forthright with people after that. Always speak to people with, I always speak to people with dignity and with respect. But I think that the deeper respect is to tell them the truth, even if it's an inconvenient one, rather than to beat around about the bush. And it still doesn't come naturally to me, and it's still a struggle. And I am an empathic person. I don't like inflicting pain, but I try to temper that with an understanding that true respect requires the kind of honesty, not brutal honesty, but a directness that people generally appreciate, as opposed to doing what comes naturally to me, which would be to beat about the bush and to try and make everybody feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I massively resonate with that as well, and pretty much end to end, from start to finish of that whole statement. Okay, my last question to you, Daniel. Thank you for being very generous with your time. It's a two-parter, really. What's the best advice you've ever been given? And then what would be your best career advice for other entrepreneurs and leaders listening?
I've been given a lot of advice over the years, and people whom I've learned from. I mentioned Eli Harari and others, but I'm going to disappoint you on both of those questions. I don't have a pithy answer of kind of the fortune cookie advice that I was given that changed my life. I just don't. I can't point to any one seminal piece of advice that I received that was earth-shattering for me. I have learned a lot of things from a lot of people over the years, and I am the result of the accumulation of wisdom that others have imparted to me, but no one thing stands out above all others. And I'm also really leery of giving generic advice to people who I don't know. So I do spend time sitting with entrepreneurs and trying to be helpful to them, but I don't have the fortune cookie, one-line Hallmark card, whatever, that I say, oh, just be true to yourself, or believe in your. I don't find those things particularly helpful, and I'm sorry, I don't have any of that to impart.
Not at all. Well, then let me reflect on your behalf, if I may, because we just had Jim Collins on the show, who obviously is full of all sorts of wisdom and advice. I'm sure you've come across his work multiple times throughout your career. And I would say that what you have is what he would describe as who luck, which is, all about your leadership style, your career, your journey being heavily impacted by the good fortune of the amazing people that you find yourself around. But of course, you don't just find yourself around such people. You work really hard through kindness, through empathy, through network building, through honesty, through curiosity, to find those people in your life, to build those relationships, and then create the journey and the path that we go on from there. And that's the thing that he defines as who luck. So I guess if I could extrapolate yours, your journey sounds a lot like that. And, it might be cheating to use one of Jim's bits of sage advice, but at the end of the day, that's what he does best. So let's leave it like that. Does that at least resonate slightly with you?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Daniel.